Hey everyone, it's Kristen Solomon here at Blackfish Gallery, and I am excited to introduce you to Ruby Joy White, who is our current Fishbowl 2 artist. We're exhibiting this month of March 2022 in our window. Welcome, Ruby.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Well, first off, just tell us about yourself. Tell us about how you got started being an artist and all about your art practice.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. To tell you about myself, how I would describe myself, I describe myself as half creative, half sociologist. And so regarding like my art practice, I think that I've always kind of been like this little woo-woo kind of creative since I was a kid. Thinking back to the types of things that I would create as a kid, I made like a lot of collages, always made a lot of things with like different words and images. And then it wasn't until I was in college that I actually started getting into painting and drawing and whatnot. And that actually just started with like a group of friends where we would do like creative nights and whatnot. So some facts I want to go ahead and say is that I'm actually just completely self-taught. Like I've never actually taken like an art class or anything like that, other than some things that my sister, who is also a practicing artist, who actually has like degrees in art and whatnot, has taught me. I've just kind of picked things up on my own and just made them into what I want it to be. I guess like how I best describe my art, I consider myself to be an altruist. I like to create kind of experiences with the work that I do. So I work with I want to say a multitude of mediums. My favorite is to definitely paint on wood, and that's kind of the painting that I have right now in Fishbowl 2. But painting on canvases, making collages and whatnot, but then also pairing images with a lot of words or writings is pretty much what you'll find. And then if you've ever seen an installation of mine, there's always some sort of interactive kind of aspect to it. Like I'll put like a record player with things, I'll put some like kind of antiques with things. And so I really want to create like an intimate experience that you're having with the piece, not just like looking at the art, but more so transporting you to like an environment with the art. And so I would say that my favorite things to do are to find, I'm going to say like alter-esque experiences with like paintings and whatnot. So you kind of feel like you're in somebody's house or you're in like a museum, that kind of thing. And then you're also asking like, what does all of this mean, essentially? And then I guess the last thing that I would say is that I like to make a lot of ode twos. And so the painting that I have up right now in Fishbowl 2 has to do with like an ode to something, which I'm happy to dig into a little bit later.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great segue to wanting to hear more about your piece, Eternity. So I'm going to share my screen, and then you can tell us more about the work that's in the window right now. Yeah. Okay. This is Ruby's piece, Eternity, that's on display until April 2nd, which is a Saturday.
Yeah, so this piece is actually the start of a series that I'm doing. And so when I talk about Ode to, the majority of my pieces, or the way that I create and even the way that I write, have to do with finding the intersection between my Blackness, my neurodivergence, being a sociologist and always asking questions about systems and how they kind of work, and then what kind of experiences I had as a child for some reason always come into play. And so with this specific series, this is called Eternity, what I was able to do, and this is a part of the series that I'm doing, is kind of infusing some of my most favorite like classic Black records that also belong to my dad's record collection. So taking these records that have had some sort of imprint on my life and also infusing them with anime characters that are Black, actually. So putting them as Black anime characters that make sense for what the subject in, and I want to say in these records are. So this specific piece, I have a Black version of Aang, if you have seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, in place for Alice Coltrane. And so I have the original artwork for Alice Coltrane's Eternity record right next to it. And so this specific record holds a lot of meaning to me, specifically the song Om Supreme. So it connects me to not just kind of like this ethereal kind of existence, but it also connects me to my father. And so what my dad and I share a lot of, we have the same brain. So he gave me his brain. We have a very similar taste in music, and he also gave me his swag. And so this specific album, I just remember like the memories that I have of it is like a sunny day. It's like playing. We always had really deep intellectual conversations in my household growing up since the time I could talk, I want to say. So it's thinking about those things, asking and pondering on the meaning of life. And this album specifically talks about like having that connection of the spirit self to essentially the earth, right? And so when I'm thinking about the anime character that kind of resonates that with me, I'm thinking about Aang from Avatar: The Last Airbender. And so I wanted to replicate what that kind of looks like in my childhood existence. And so the piece is also very like childlike. It almost looks like a child has painted it, and holds like that specific kind of wandering meaning for me, which is why I selected this as the first one. And then of course I created like an altar around the original album, that being in the flowers, to kind of hold that aspect in the space. So yeah.
I love that. Is that your dad's copy?
It totally is. I took all his stuff.
It's really lovely. I love like how loved it's, you know, like it's one of those, you can tell it's been played and loved so much. It's interesting. So you talked about a little bit about your background in sociology. Is that what you studied in school?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Things that I studied in school. So journalism and sociology. So writing and sociology.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when you're talking about your artwork and coming from the like a sociologist lens, it feels a lot like almost to like archaeology, like these found objects that are representing our society and what will that say about our society, or culture over time, and the way you put them on display, just kind of like these found objects in museums.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting the thing that you're talking about, because it's like one, like how objects are actually, we use them day to day, and then you're displaying them in that way with a record player or whatever, but then also this whole elevating it to this whole other experience of really looking at it as like their artifacts and the weight that they carry, and not just the symbolism behind it, but just what it says about you and your culture and what you celebrate and what you want to preserve.
Yeah,
it's really
yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you said what I like to preserve.
Mm-hmm.
Because essentially, yeah, like when I say that I make a lot of ode tos, like this is an ode, right, to that kind of like more Black, I want to say classical kind of music, or Black classic Black music, or what it means, right, to be a Black person. And then also within my neurodivergence and how I have to walk throughout the world as a Black neurodivergent person. And so I would also kind of like describe this piece. It's like, it's kind of weird. If you're like not clued into like my messaging, I want to say, you're probably like, well, what is this? And I think that that's kind of all of my art, is that's really specific to like my Black, queer, kind of nerdy, and really nerdy, really weird kind of experience. And so that's kind of what I feel like is exuded right from this piece by itself, but also preserving, you know, an experience that many of us have had, but haven't always had the platform in order to like say this is how we are, and very proudly.
Yeah, I love that, because that's exactly it is. And I find that's what it comes down to for art that really speaks to me, is something that is really encapsulating such a unique perspective or experience of something that nobody else, you know, you are unique in your way, and there's the culmination of all of who you are between your history and your own thoughts and the way you think, are like nobody else, you know. And maybe there's a certain sense, right, that there's sort of underlying themes that we can all resonate with, but ultimately like this is yours. It's almost like a self-portrait in some ways too, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. 100%. And so, you know, when I talk about bringing it back to like my childhood and whatnot, I find myself getting lost in like characters a lot. And I think that that's kind of a true thing that some neurodivergent people will tell you. And so being able to then like put on display like how that has made me be able to understand myself, make sense of myself, and also appreciate myself, but being able to reflect it on this art piece has been, I want to say, really transformative in me and my practice, because I'm able to like just be me, maskless, without trying to hide behind something else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting too, though, because but the avatars, you know, I find like as we delve deeper into this digital whole or universe that we've created, and how creating avatars and having avatars that really feel like they represent us truly, is really important, to have that same sense of digital prep. I don't know, this is like such a kind of weird tangent, but like Facebook changed their avatars and I was like really mad because my avatar they had before really felt like it was me and looked like me, and like they just changed it. And I'm like, I don't like it. It doesn't feel like me. I don't want it to represent me that way. And I think it's
Right.
important that, how we're represented feels like us and that we get to choose it. That's the kind of interesting thing about the digital world too, or even just animation or art or creation, is that we get to really own that and have that control to create like how we want to be represented and how we want to be seen.
Right. Right. Yeah, all of what you're saying right now resonates a lot for me, just in the way in which I even approach my artistic practice. I mean, it's taken me even a long time to even call myself an artist or a creative, even though I know that this has been a part of who I've always been and how I've always like created things. It's always based on experience. And so when I say that I like to like merge my sociological practice with my creative practice, this is essentially what I mean is like, I like to ask the questions, who are we? Not just as a species, but like, who are we as individuals? What is kind of the foundation of our lives? What are the threads that put our lives together? And I really appreciate people having a medium like creative expression to be able to show like, this is what's in my head. This is also my experience. And this is how I like see myself. And even if it doesn't make sense for somebody else, it could make sense for this person. And then feeling so affirmed and validated in that way, of having ourselves reflected back to us in the things that we create.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, powerful experience for
Yeah.
sure. Awesome. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'd love to hear more about what you're working on next.
Yeah.
Where we can follow you and, how we can support you moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually what I'm working on is a continuation of this series. And so I am going to be essentially recreating some of those classic albums. Music is like everything to me too. So that's why I like wanted to do this specific project, but I'll be creating some more of these albums, and infusing them with characters that make sense for me and how I see myself reflected in like the lyrics, but reflected in the experience type of thing, but with this same kind of like nerdy aspect with anime characters. And so really looking forward to that. And then I am also working on like a larger kind of altar that's like an ode to myself, in the stage that I'm in life. And so I'm not sure what that's going to look like yet. I just know that it's going to honor Blackness, it's going to honor quirkiness, it's going to honor neurodivergence, and asking myself really deep and hard questions about who I am. And hopefully folks are able to go through the experience, interact with the objects, but interact with like my experience to find, ways in which they tap into that as well, or that were similar, and be able to ask themselves those questions. So where you can find me, I'm kind of just floating around social media right now, but you can mostly find me on Instagram. My at is Rastaru, Rastaroo, and you can pretty much find me on social media that way too. I'm not really like a self-promoter, if that makes sense. I think people just kind of fall into what my stuff is. But if you do want to communicate with me and whatnot, you can do that. Also have a website, rubyjoywhite.com. It is under construction, but should be up here fairly soon. I want to say the next couple of weeks. So be able to talk to people that way as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And if you would like to keep tabs on Ruby, you should definitely follow her on social media and check out her coming soon site when it's ready. And thank you so much, Ruby. It's been just a joy to talk to you and hear more about your work. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.